Hello, church. I pray that things are going well with you and yours. Here we are almost 3 weeks into our stay-at-home order, and it certainly is creating all sorts of dynamics that we have never experienced before. And I trust that God is giving you grace through all of this. I wanted to share something that I found fascinating, at least. I read an article in thinker.org, which is a online newsletter written from a Christian perspective, but it has a lot of kind of sophisticated writers like William Lane Craig and people like that. And it was an article about Antony Flew, who is somebody I'm sure that most of you have never heard of. But Antony Flew was somewhat of a darling of the atheistic community, at least until he wasn't. He was raised in a Christian home. His father was a Methodist pastor, and he went to Christian schools. And yet, when he finished a university, he decided that he was going to become an atheist. He said for no real particular reason. It's just that Christianity didn't make any sense to him. In fact, he became what we call an empiricist, at least that's the way he viewed himself, that you should only believe in something if there's enough evidence to support that belief. And basically that belief is formed, or that evidence is formed by the observation of your senses. In other words, what you can see, what you can hear, what you can touch, what you can taste, what you can smell. And then you use documentation of that information and you use some experimentation to see if it's true, and then you have a empirical conclusion. He became really a significant voice in the philosophy of atheism. He himself was a philosopher, well-known and respected around the world. He was one of the signatories of the Humanist Manifesto when that came out. But his greatest contribution, I think, was the argument that the responsibility was not upon the atheist to prove that there was no God, but quite opposite. The responsibility was on the Christian, or the believer, or deist, as you might call them, to prove that there in fact was a God. He had over 40 works that were to his name. He was quite an accomplished, and almost all of them were written in defense of atheism. He was essentially a rock star in the atheist world, and he often debated Christians in various publications, guys like Gary Habermas or William Lane Craig or others who are well-known defenders of the Christian faith. But then something happened. At 80 years of age, he changed his mind. And his explanation was really interesting. He said that he basically had to follow where the evidence took him. And he said, like Einstein, who had realized that the integrated complexity of the world of physics led him to believe that there had to be a divine intelligence behind it all. In other words, Einstein essentially said, in the beginning is God, and everything else is a detail. But he said he too not only saw that in terms of the macro universe, but he saw it in the micro universe, particularly in looking at the nature of DNA, and that it's a coded language which actually had to be written by an intelligence. It wasn't something that could just randomly cobble together. And as he began to realize that the entire essence of everything that exists in the universe has to follow that code, he realized that that code had to be written, it had to have an author, there had to be a divine being. In fact, he said he realized that the integrated complexity of the universe could only be honestly answered by a designing God. And that unlike the cosmos, the living world, that which has life to it, unlike rocks, is inordinately more complex than even the majesty of the universe. So it was that he, at the age of 80, suddenly turned the chapter in his life and had a whole different point of view. And he published a book thereafter, was entitled "There Is a God," and then subtitled "How the World's Most Notorious Atheist Changed His Mind." Well, this didn't sit well with the atheistic community, particularly men like Richard Dawkins, who wrote The God Delusion. He's a guy that I think sees himself as being really smart, but isn't particularly. But basically, he said, well, obviously, Flew has become senile. He's suffering from advanced dementia. But the problem is that Flew wasn't alone in the 20th century to change his mind. Not only, as I mentioned, Einstein came to that conclusion, but Robert Jastrow, probably the most famous astrophysicist of the 20th century, basically declared that he had to come to the same conclusion. There was no way the universe could operate within its systems and its complexity without there being a designer behind them. The famed journalist Malcolm Muggeridge, who was also named for his commitment to atheism, also became a Christian late in life in his 70s, and he had a transformational experience. Beforehand, he was not only wealthy and famous, but he was kind of a randy character because atheism gave him permission to live his life any way he wanted. But suddenly he was transformed and became a completely different person. Of course, probably most famously was C.S. Lewis, who spent most of his adult life as an atheist and came to a saving faith and became one of the greatest polemicists for Christianity that the world has ever seen. But also one that's overlooked many times is his wife, at least for about 4 years before she passed away. He and Lewis married when he was 56 years of age. He married Joy Davidson, and many people don't realize that in America, she was a published and accomplished poet. She got her master's degree from Columbia University when she was only 20 years of age, which is no small accomplishment. But she was also a devoted communist, a committed atheist. And then she said that it came a point where I love the way she stated it. She said, "The first time my pride was forced to admit that I was not, after all, the master of my fate. All my defenses, all the walls of arrogance and cocksureness and self-love behind which I had hid from God went down momentarily, and God came in." Her self-assurance went down momentarily, and God came in. The integrated complexity of the universe is something that I think is the strongest evidence that there is a God. And it's also one of the greatest comforts that you and I can derive from the times we're in. I say that because I'm thinking about what Jesus said in Matthew 10:29 when he said, "Are not 2 sparrows sold for a penny, yet not one of them will fall to the ground apart from the will of your Father. The very hairs of your head are all numbered. So don't be afraid. You are worth more than many sparrows." I thought I'd also read Luke's version of that same statement in Luke 12:6, where he says, "Are not 5 sparrows sold for 2 pennies? Yet not one of them is forgotten by God. Indeed, the very hairs of your head are all numbered. Don't be afraid. You are worth more than many sparrows." As I was reading that, it came to my mind. I remember that great song that was written many years ago and sung by a whole litany of great artists. You can go online and get copies. I think Whitney Houston's is probably the best. But it's simply called "His Eyes Are Upon the Sparrow." But the words, the lyrics of the song go this way. "Why should I feel discouraged? Why should the shadows come? Why should my heart feel lonely and long for heaven and home? When Jesus is my portion, a constant friend is he. His eye is on the sparrow, and I know he watches over me. His eye is on the sparrow, and I know he watches over me." Take heart, friends, as we go through this time of disturbance and dislocation. Take heart. His eye is upon you, more surely than his eye is even on the sparrows that fall from the sky. God, in his integrated complexity, has a capacity to fix his eyes on you and care for you every moment of every day. Be encouraged. God bless you.